Welcome to HR Voices, a podcast for independent HR and people professionals and the businesses they support. HR Voices is brought to you by the expert team at HR Independence Limited. We hope you enjoy.
Hello everyone, welcome once again to another episode of HR Voices podcast. I'm your host, Mary Asante, and with me here today, I've got the awesome Charlie. Hi, Charlie.
Hi, Mary. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us. And today with Charlie, we'll be talking about neurodiversity inclusion at work. So before we dive into the topic, I would like to hand over to Charlie to introduce themselves.
Thanks, Mary. So my name's Charlie Hart. I'm also known on social media as Awesome Charlie with an AU for autistic. I was diagnosed autistic in 2018 and started to become a social media neurodiversity advocate. So I worked as an HR analyst for 20 years. So I've got quite a lot of HR experience and expertise and CIPD qualifications. But since discovering my neurotype, I've focused on diversity and inclusion. So 2 years ago, I quit my long-term HR job and I'm now a neurodiversity inclusion speaker and writer and content creator.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that background, Charlie. And I'm sure we'll probably touch on your diagnosis as we go through this conversation. But yes, well done on going through that journey. And also, I would say going through that journey for so long before your diagnosis.
Yeah, I was 42. So.
Yeah. I mean, I have a 15-year-old who has both autism and ADHD, so I can absolutely understand what it may have been like for you and potentially for your parents as well, going through that. So, yes. So neurodiversity inclusion at work. If we start to wrap what that simple but quite complex statement means, maybe we can start from, what does neurodiversity mean?
Yeah, so that's a really great place to start, and I usually do, because it sounds really complicated, but it really isn't. It's a concept that conveys that every single human brain and mind is unique. So that means that every member of the human race, we each think, feel, and process differently from one another. There will be some commonality, for example, people with the same neurotype. So I might have something in common with somebody else who, like me, is autistic and ADHD and has complex PTSD, but not everything. We're all unique like a fingerprint. So that's the biomedical science bit of it, that every brain and central nervous system is different. Yeah. But then the neurodiversity movement puts a social spin on that. So it was coined in the early 90s, and the neurodiversity movement was born, and that became really a social justice movement. So it's people that believe in the neurodiversity paradigm, which tells us that, yes, every brain and mind and central nervous system is unique. But not only that, it's a good thing. It's advantageous to the species, much like biodiversity is in nature, in an ecosystem. In a human population, such as the whole of humanity, or a village, or a team, or a workforce, it's good that there is that natural neurodiversity. So people within the neurodiversity movement have been pushing this message and advocating for meaningful inclusion. So people who are wired differently deserve to have a place in society and work and education, like any other kind of diversity movement.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Charlie. And I think herein lies the challenge, which is there are potentially as many unique individuals in the world generally
Yes.
as there are human populations in the world. And when you
Absolutely.
think about it in context of neurodiversity, I think this old statement of if you meet one autistic person, you have met one autistic person, because no two individuals will have the same traits or
Yeah.
will have their autism manifest in the same way. And
Or context.
or
Yeah.
context, and you touched on ADHD and PTSD as well. So depending on what else might be going on in the individual's world, how certain things manifest itself will be very different.
Absolutely.
And
So, and neurodiversity is all of us. It's not just people who have a neurodevelopmental difference, but also if you do have a neurodevelopmental difference, such as autism and ADHD and dyslexia, the impact of that is highly contextual. So I will become more disabled by my environment if I'm, say, going through a period where my PTSD is particularly bad or my anxiety is, if I've got a lot of conflicting priorities or stress at work or at home or both, then I become more disabled by the traits of my autism. So it's dynamic and fluctuating. And not only that, the impact is significantly affected by things like hormonal changes. So puberty, pregnancy, menopause, all of those things have an impact as well, particularly ADHD. So if you're a woman with ADHD, it could be that you've gone through 50 years of your life undiagnosed, but then menopause hits and that exacerbates all of the traits. And you suddenly realize that you have difficulty coping with certain things and that you are wired differently and need more support and compassion.
absolutely. And I think that leads nicely into our next bit of it, which is inclusion, the inclusion bit of the topic, which is neurodiversity, inclusion at work. What does inclusion mean?
Yeah, so to me, inclusion means you've got a seat at the table, so you're in there, but you're not tolerated, you're wanted. So if people embrace the neurodiversity within their workforce and they acknowledge that it's a good thing that people think and feel and process differently, and we are accommodated and believed and accepted for who we are without expecting us to mask and perform normal, then they can leverage all of the positives that come with that diversity of thought. It's also the right thing to do, though. It's the right thing to do to accept people with all kinds of differing characteristics. It will be good for your reputation and your employer value proposition. So increasingly, we find the younger generations, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, the workforce of the future, expect their needs to be accommodated and for them to not be treated in a very normative way. So they expect work to fit into their life and they care about things like social impact and corporate social responsibility. So if you do have a neuro inclusion strategy, that will make you a more attractive employer to that generation. It helps people to thrive within their roles, which is good for turnover and progression as well. So we want people with all kinds of minds and different ideas and perspectives at the top levels of organizations. There's no point having a board if they all think alike. So it's like any other kind of diversity, it's just a really good idea. But with neurodiversity, many of the things that you can do to make a workplace, an employment situation more neuro-inclusive, many of them are really cheap or free and easy to implement and can actually benefit far more people than you might realize.
Yeah, thank you for that, Charlie. And I think all those are very important points to highlight, as in within the workplace. I think statistics, the Office of National Statistics and every other statistics out there demonstrates that especially autistic adults are less likely to be in employment compared to other people with disability.
Yeah.
So it's
compared with the general population, that is.
yeah,
And I'm glad you didn't quote the statistics. I take it with a big pinch of salt,
absolutely.
because so many people go through education and employment and life in general without knowing that they're neurodivergent. So, and certainly without knowing they're autistic. If you look at statistics about the amount of employment of autistic people, it will completely omit all those who work and don't know they're autistic.
Yeah.
So it's far more common
think
than people realize.
in the
Yeah.
same light, if you put in all those who are not in work and are not aware that they are autistic and that people like that, then probably it will be a larger number. But invariably, the point I was trying to make is that the autistic individuals, because of sometimes the traits, especially around the communication, the way they think, interact, etc., with others within the workplace, because it's not within the expected norm, they are less likely to be included in
Yes.
the workplace.
They experience barriers to employment and inclusion and promotion and succeeding and thriving in their roles, definitely. So I subscribe to the social model of disability. And what that teaches us is that there isn't something wrong with the person, that they don't need to be fixed, that it's to do with the context. So I, as an autistic person with ADHD and PTSD, I can be disabled by inaccessible environments, policies, processes, practices, and expectations. But conversely, I can be enabled by people changing their expectations so that we don't expect everyone to perform normal, and by increasing the accessibility of the environment and the systems and processes.
Excellent. And that is a really good or nice lead into what are some of these barriers that may exist in the workplace that will potentially be stopping neurodivergent individuals performing at their best or being themselves at work.
So there are so many of these. So I'll just pull out a few from my own experience. And I also find that people focus too much on the recruitment of external new starters, because actually recruitment involves internal promotions and moves as well. And it isn't just about getting the foot in the door, but having adequate systems of support and acceptance. But to me, some of the barriers have been things like people expecting me to be able to remember verbal instructions from a project team meeting, for example. So, and even people really high up in HR who pride themselves on being inclusive and caring about diversity and inclusion have done this. I've been in projects that have been run by HR managers who they assign all of the project deliverables in a project team meeting verbally. And if you say to them, could you just drop me an email with a few bullets about that? Then they quite often say they're too busy. So they care about inclusion, they care about getting the project work done, but they don't actually walk the walk. It's just talk. What you find is if you actually take the time to look at how you can enable someone that is disabled by a barrier like that, there's usually some kind of quick fix. So one is, in that scenario, allowing the person to take their laptop and immediately write their actions into their tasks. You can have someone taking notes. You could use an AI note taker. So even a free one like Otter AI, if you use that to record a meeting, you can then ask it to summarize the actions. So there's so many things that can be done. But what I think is the biggest barrier is that people, even really intelligent, thoughtful people, can not understand that others experience the world differently to themselves. So, for instance, I have some sensory issues. I'm not profoundly disabled by my sensory environment, but I do struggle with bright lights. I struggle with auditory processing when there's a lot of background noise. So I might not be able to hear what people are saying to me if I'm having a meeting in an open plan office with background chatter. And I struggle with the rumbling noise that air conditioning units can sometimes make. It can make me feel quite sleepy and tired and headachy. But if I say I can't focus on this conversation because of the background noise, or this air conditioning is making me feel sleepy, I'm too often met with, it's not that bad. Nobody else has complained, that kind of thing. And we really have to kind of take ourselves out of our own mind and be more accepting of what other people are expressing. It quite often, if it comes to the point where a neurodivergent employee is saying, this is making me uncomfortable, or this is giving me problems with achieving my work, they've already been struggling for quite some time. So we've been accommodating the neurotypical working environment and expectations for some time before we eventually say, we can't work like this, we can't work in these conditions. So please
Indirectly,
believe us.
what you're saying is that in a lot of cases, what is potentially happening is that a lot of neurodivergent individuals try to either ignore their own sensory issues
Yes.
or barriers that may be quite hard for them, to try to see if they can accommodate it until it gets very unbearable when they
Yeah.
become, actually, this is really bothering me. So if someone is telling you, it's not a matter of they just instantly going, oh, this is bothering me. The likelihood is that they may have considered and they may have tried to live with it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
it
we
doesn't.
usually have. Yeah. So by the time we voice that discomfort, maybe we're already simmering into a meltdown, or maybe we're already at risk of slipping a deadline.
Yeah.
So another thing is, if we're constantly task switching, and this can become very overwhelming, but that can sneak up on us. So if, for example, working from home, I have a lot of Teams meetings or Zoom meetings. This is my only Zoom meeting today, so I'm pretty comfortable. I've been away from my laptop all morning. But if I had scattered online meetings throughout the day, then I would be overwhelmed and simmering into a meltdown by dinner time. Nobody at work would see that, because actually I'd probably go off camera if I was really struggling. But if say my husband or kids said to me at 5 o'clock, what's for dinner? I might erupt then. So it's really not good for our well-being, because if we do simmer into a meltdown, it can be followed by a period of shame, and we're really not functioning at our best if we're going through that, and it can take a lot to bounce back from that. It's not good for our well-being.
Again, a very important point to consider is, as more and more organizations post-COVID are pretty much into the hybrid working style or remote working, it's important to consider when scheduling meetings and discussions, etc., not to make it lengthy back to back, but to allow people to have breaks in between, time away from the screen, etc., to help generally with their well-being. And
I'd go a little further than that, I think, and say, take the time to find out what the person's needs are and believe them, because I'm okay with back-to-back meetings if they're all morning, and I know then that I can have lunch and then spend the afternoon doing project work or something. That suits me better than scattered meetings with breaks in between, because it takes a while to task switch. So I find this a really helpful way to think of it. Tendril theory. I can't remember there's an autistic advocate who came up with this tendril theory. I forget her name. I'll find out. But she explains that it's like the tendrils of her mind get engrossed into a task. And then if she has to leave that and do some other quick thing, then it's having to pull them out of the task and back in. and then turn her attention and then put them into this other task. So say I've got a half-hour gap between meetings and I've got deadlines, I'm going to be trying to work in that gap. So I'm constantly task switching, and it's very exhausting, and it actually means that you don't have half an hour free because of the amount of time it takes to transition.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So that again, that's a really good point. But if you have neurodivergent individuals within your team, to take into account by speaking to them what fits best for them. And I think the challenge can sometimes be potentially if you have 2 or 3 neurodivergent individuals within your team, you may not be able to satisfy all their individual needs, but hopefully you can work with them to find a good medium
Compromise
that works for everyone.
It won't just be neurodivergent people who have the needs either. I mean, they're not special needs, they're human needs. Everybody has them. And what we noticed during the pandemic is that working parents have needs, whether they're disabled or not. There were many people who were trying to work as normal with their usual output and their usual number of meetings from home with kids around whose schools were shut. And I think neurodivergent parents of neurodivergent kids felt that a lot. But when you bear in mind that many of us don't even know we're neurodivergent, and the kids might not be identified either, you've really got to think about every individual's needs.
I think absolutely. And the point is that you balance the needs for your team, right? Because, and the reason why I said if you've got 2 or 3 neurodivergent members on your team, I think making reasonable adjustments doesn't necessarily mean giving people special treatment. It means that taking into account their various needs. And as a good manager,
do that with everybody. That's just good management.
Your team to see what works for this team. And I'm sure you'd have come across it more and more when managers actually get quite nervous when they have somebody with a disability within their team, and also someone with a neurodivergent condition that they may not know what's necessarily to deal with or how to deal with it. And they go into panic mode. And sometimes panic means, actually, I'm not going to do anything because I don't want to get it wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is one of the reasons that I don't tend to use language like disclose a disability, request reasonable adjustments, disability discrimination. I think this is about good management and it's about good culture. So if we take all of the legal framework and just ignore that for a minute and just think about the fact that everybody within a team thinks and feels differently and has different needs. And I say everybody, this is neurodiversity, it's everyone, it's not just neurodivergent people. If you bear that in mind and create a culture where people feel safe and actually are safe to voice their individual needs and to share ideas for how things can be, processes can be improved, policies can be improved, how to make things more efficient, more streamlined, more accessible for everyone, then we can just work together as a team of human beings with different needs without having any legalistic, scary conversations. So one thing that drives me absolutely mad is when I see neurodiversity advocates who are often a lot younger than I am. I'm 49. So they haven't got a lot of work experience and they're quite early on in their journey of understanding how to advocate for their needs. And they talk about how you must give me a reasonable adjustment because I have ADHD, it's automatically a disability. And to me, it's legally wrong, but it's also not the right way to approach things. So we should be having human conversations that are mutually respectful, not trying to back people into a corner. And it's absolutely up to the manager's going to want everybody to thrive in their role and to be able to achieve their objectives and not burn out and not leave. They're going to want that. It's mutually beneficial to have a mutually respectful conversation with that psychological safety that you need in order for that to happen.
I think that is a really important point. And when people are going through either recruitment processes, promotion, etc., within the workplace, one of the key concerns is one, getting it wrong. But then the second aspect of it is that, oh, this is all too difficult. And you are absolutely right in pointing out that if you're just throwing, oh, you have to make reasonable adjustment, you have to do this, it seems very difficult, and sometimes it seems out of reach. But if it's turned into a conversation which is around, and I'll go back to the example you used around, if I'm having a meeting in an open office with background chatter, with probably high level of lighting, as well as air conditioning noise in the background, then I will struggle to focus. There's just too much going on for me. And in that instance, if the manager knows booking a meeting room away from the open plan office, for example, will be considered as a good, reasonable adjustment. And that can be the manager understanding that, hey, actually, if I'm having this meeting with Charlie in this open plan office, knowing Charlie is probably going to be a bit too much for them. So I will probably book a meeting room somewhere.
I wouldn't even think of that as a reasonable adjustment, though, because usually with a reasonable adjustment, you've got like a formal record. These are the things that have been agreed for this individual.
Necessarily,
but
not necessarily. I hear where you
it's not the legal thing. It's just considering
I hear where you are
people's
coming
needs.
from. And I think not necessarily. For me, reasonable adjustment is making adjustments as and when needed, not necessarily being captured on a risk assessment, health and safety, reasonable steps. This is what we're going to be doing aspect. But in the aspect of, look, I know this member of my team, or this is how my team functions, work best, etc. And so, for example, if you've got somebody with, let's say, a wheelchair user, for example, in your team, and you are considering an off-site meeting, thinking about accessibility.
It's an accessibility tweak, really.
To get there, being able to get into the meeting, doesn't need to be on the first or ground or last floor. What matters the most is that, okay, if it's on the 10th floor, this person has got lift, etc., to be able to get them to that 10th floor. And you've thought about if there's a fire alarm or something like that goes off, how are you going to safely get that person out?
That's the health and safety aspect.
That's the health and safety aspects of it. And
if it's an ad hoc tweak that will help a neurodivergent team member or anyone else that struggles with that environment on an ad hoc basis, it's just an accessibility tweak. It doesn't need the reasonable adjustment request. It's just thinking about how to help people thrive in their roles. It can be completely informal.
Absolutely.
So I just like to take the legalistic language out of it.
Absolutely. And I totally agree. And the reason why I'm stating that is to highlight that you don't have to go through a whole rigmarole of pages to be able to make reasonable adjustment. And that is what I'm trying to point out.
And it can be a negotiation and a compromise as well. So this is an example from my last job. I worked really long term, the Law Society and the Solicitors Regulation Authority. But after that, I worked for a mental health charity for 10 months, and we were all based from home. So my manager, if she was neurodivergent, she didn't know, but she had needs just like I do. So, and the way that she liked to run her team is she would drop into a Teams video call if she wanted to ask somebody something. And she thought that was recreating the working together in the same room environment. But what she hadn't considered really is how that affects other people with their work. So rather than moan about her behind her back, which is really unhelpful, rather than making a reasonable adjustment request, which is way more legalistic than you need here, I just said to her, are you aware that your way of working with the unexpected Teams video calls is overwhelming to me, and it's making it harder for me to meet my deadlines, and it can have an impact on my well-being. Can we please have a chat about how we can do this differently? And she then explained that she knows I prefer to type messages into Teams, but then she explained to me that she has a frozen shoulder and carpal tunnel syndrome. So if she's constantly typing rather than speaking aloud, then this is exacerbating those physical conditions. So it's a mutually respectful relationship, and she and I talked about how we could work together in a way that would suit us both. And what we agreed in the end is that she would send me a quick Teams message saying, are you free to have a video call? And if I was in the middle of something, I would reply saying, not just now, but how about 11 o'clock? And then we would have the video call at 11 o'clock. It suited us both.
That is an interesting example, and I'm glad you brought that up, Charlie, because sometimes we can be so focused on us that we forget that the person on the other side of the equation is not doing that on purpose. They are not doing that just to snoop on you, check on you, micromanage or anything like that, but they may also have a really valid point as to why their preference of checking in, of communicating, of doing however they do things is different to the way you would prefer to do things.
So the key thing really to me there is that we're open about our needs and challenges so that we can have a conversation about how to make it work for both of us without it turning into a legal discussion. So it's just mutual respect. It's consideration for other people's needs, and that is needed across the entire workforce. It isn't just autistic individuals or wheelchair users. It's every single human has needs.
One of the things that I come across quite often is when people have gone through a diagnosis process and they go, right, I've been diagnosed or I've self-diagnosed or whatever, and then I've had a conversation with my workplace. Now they don't know what to do with me. Now they're starting to treat me differently, see me differently, act differently, and that really isn't helping me.
Yeah, that's a problem. So this is why neurodiversity advocates are tirelessly working to promote understanding and acceptance of neurodivergent differences, because there is still a stigma. There's still a lot of people that don't really get it. And we need to listen to lived experience stories. We need to open our minds and our hearts, because you can't just kind of have the angle where you've heard that, for example, autistic people lack empathy. You've heard that once, maybe it's been disproved, but you've heard it once, and then you think that that means the member of your team who's had their autistic epiphany, that they lack empathy. So we really need to have a more person-centered approach, but understanding more about each of the neurological conditions and how they affect people in the real world can be super helpful as well. Lived experience storytelling is really powerful, and neurodivergent employee support groups as well, and encouraging people to step up as role models if they feel psychologically safe to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was going to say, so how do we encourage people to have relevant and helpful conversations within the workplace to help raise awareness and to help start breaking down some of these barriers to make the workplace more neuro-inclusive?
So I really think that getting people to share their experiences, and whether it's having an external speaker like me come in and do a lunch and learn, or people from your own employee resource networks. It can be anything really. If we have a platform where we can share our experiences and our tips, then it helps to raise awareness. And nothing about us without us is a mantra for this as well. So you wouldn't put on an event about barriers that women experience to promotion and have a panel of men talking about this. You would have someone from the affected minority group talking. So absolutely, when looking at having a speaker or publishing guidelines or anything like that, involve people from the affected community.
And that is a good point around, whilst the only caveat though to add to that is a lot of the time people think, okay, we are having discussions about this, coming up with strategies for this, and then they look to the affected group or individuals to provide the answers.
Yeah, it will only go so far, because
Exactly.
not many of us are experts in the inclusion best practice. So you can get lived experience perspectives, but sometimes you might need an external consultant in order to bring that expertise.
Yeah, and it's important to also know that when you're having these conversations and including neurodivergent individuals, you don't put the onus on them to come up with all the answers, because that can be overwhelming and frustrating as well.
So I have a quick tip. So yeah, negotiating reasonable adjustments is really hard if you're newly diagnosed and you haven't identified your needs yet. It's also really hard if you're the manager or the HR representative and you don't know a lot about the condition and the different ways it can affect people. So you can involve occupational health, and if they're any good, because they're not all, some of them don't have that specific knowledge. But a tip from me is to ask ChatGPT. So when I was diagnosed with complex PTSD, I went to ChatGPT and said, I'm an HR systems analyst, I'm autistic and I have ADHD and I have adjustments in place for that. My manager's asked me how she can support me with my complex PTSD as well. I don't really know. What can you suggest? And it searched through its huge databases and it came up with loads of suggestions, some of which were not really that relevant and others were great. So you can use databases like that to come up with like a menu of adjustments and then choose the ones that you think would help you. And if they are agreed, then you trial it for long enough to know if it helps or not. You could keep having conversations every week, every month. But the really important thing is to review that. It's usually like 6-monthly review or annual review. If something isn't working, tweak it, take it out. If it's not enough, then add something else. So it should be an evolving process, because we are constantly learning about ourselves, and things change. Like things changed for me when I hit menopause and my working memory was drastically impacted.
That is critical to the successful inclusion strategy in the workplace. The fact that, look, once you've got a strategy agreed, it's not static. It needs to be reviewed. It needs to change as things change. And again, as I said at the beginning, my daughter is 15 years old. And sometimes battling like with professionals, it sounds as if she's not expected to change from her diagnosis of when she was about 5 years old.
Yeah, but obviously things do change when you become an adult.
Exactly.
She'll always be autistic. She'll always have ADHD.
Faces, etc. Things change. And whilst we expect for neurotypical individuals, when people come into the workplace and after they've been there a year, 2 years, whatever, and things change, the same way things do change for neurodivergent individuals as time goes on. So it's very important to keep talking, to keep reviewing, and to keep checking in.
Absolutely.
If things are working or not working, and not assume that, okay, we put the strategy in place and then that's it. It's supposed to be the be all and end all in everything.
And some things can get easier over time. So I would have really struggled to advocate for my needs when I was first diagnosed. What are we now? Yeah, so that was 8 years ago. But now I'm a professional speaker and I live and breathe this stuff. I can do it easily. When I used to be very rejection sensitive and very unconfident, and I was very self-conscious about my verbal and non-verbal communication style, that held me back a lot. But now that I do professional speaking and I go to professional speaking association events and I get opportunities to speak on big stages, I don't care anymore. I can be as quirky and as I like, and it doesn't bother me because people take me on to be a neurodivergent speaker. They don't expect me to perform normal. So things can get easier as well. I still struggle with the phone though, it's when I worked at SRA, I had real issues turning around system queries on the phone, because although I don't pick up body language very easily, if all I have is a voice, it's even harder. My manager used to coach me through the conversations. So before we even knew I was autistic, she knew I'd got phone anxiety and she'd help me prepare for a conversation and then ask me how it went. If she did that all the time and expected me to work on the things I find difficult all the time, I would have been pretty miserable. But when it's just occasionally, it can help you build those skills.
Yeah, so knowing what people's strengths are, what they enjoy doing, as opposed to things they struggle with, things that cause them anxiety, and putting in place measures that, such as you said, your manager did, which is coaching you through voice conversations, or only conversations to help you to be able to cope with that, help you to cope with that role, I presume.
She did really well, because I think many people might think if you're autistic or you have any kind of condition that means you've got phone anxiety, that you're asking to be excused from ever having to take phone calls. And it wasn't like that at all. She was helping me to develop skills, but in a comfortable way, not every day. She wasn't throwing me at the deep end and saying you have to answer all the phone calls all day today or anything like that. It was just gradually building up skills.
Okay. Thank you very much, Charlie. And again, a topic that we can probably spend all day.
Oh, I could talk about this all day. Yeah, I need to write a book.
Well, that's your next challenge then, isn't it? I look forward to reading it when you've written it. But we like ending our conversations with top 3 tips for our listeners, so anyone listening who's thinking, okay, neurodiversity inclusion at work, what would be your top 3 tips for?
I can't really rank them because I've got so many that I think are important, but I'll give you 3 that come to mind that I think anyone could instantly implement. So one is allowing people to express their communication preferences in their email auto signature. We tried this with the manager who I mentioned, who had the frozen shoulder. She gave me a mobile phone and I was getting unexpected calls, and I said to her, I don't want this phone, it's causing me stress. And she said, if you'd rather receive a Teams message, just put that in your auto signature. I did. And it worked so well that we rolled it out across the whole company. So, and it isn't like a mandate. It's just saying, if you want to work with me in the way that I'm most comfortable, this is my preference. The next is about sending out interview questions in advance. So this isn't something I think you should do if someone is anxious or autistic and they ask you as a reasonable adjustment. This is something I think we should do for everybody. We're expected to prepare for interviews. How the heck are you supposed to prepare for an interview if you don't know what they're going to ask you? So unless it's a job where you're required to think on your feet and troll your memory for examples of things on the spot in a really quick turnaround, there's no reason that you shouldn't receive the questions in advance. let's do that for everyone. It will help everyone. It helps if you're anxious. It helps if you've got a bit of a rubbish memory for whatever reason, if you've got brain fog due to bereavement or menopause, so many things. So let's just do that as a standard. And the third one is to believe us. So if I mentioned this before, but if somebody says that they're struggling with an environment or a process, that it poses challenges to them, don't be dismissive of their struggles and say it's not that bad. Believe them, because they're not making it up and they're not trying to be difficult. We tend to be very obliging and to try and fit in. If it's come to the point where we're raising it as an issue, then please do listen and believe us and take us seriously and accommodate us wherever you can.
Right. All right. Thank you very much, Charlie, for your time. It's been an awesome conversation and I've really enjoyed it. And I do hope our listeners have enjoyed it too. If you do have any questions, either for Charlie or for myself, please do get in touch via hrvoices@hrindependence.co.uk. And if there are any topics that you'd like us to discuss in our future episodes, again, please do get in touch. Thank you and see you all again soon.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of HR Voices. If you have a topic you'd like us to cover or would like to be a guest, we'd love to hear from you. Connect with us on social media or email us at hrvoices@hrindependence.co.uk. Tune in next time.